I don't think there's any going back with either major party that we have. We have a series of mandates and ordinances and constitutional backbends that Trump and the conservatives are looking at and trying to deploy. It's not as though the progressives aren't going to try to do the same thing. They get back in power, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. We can't go back with the two major parties, and we also can't go forward with them. The good news, if you want to call it good news, is that a plurality of Americans are very dissatisfied with and no longer identify with either major political party. The biggest difficulty that I've seen in the work that I've done is a combination of learned helplessness and shared delusion, which basically means people think that there's nothing that they can do and they're alone in the way that they feel. My challenge that I've been working on for a while has been trying to bring people together who have a common cause, show them that they're not alone, and show them that, incredible things can happen. It's very difficult. It's one of those things that requires having all hands on deck. There are the raw materials there, right? We just need to kind of dig into it and then work with it.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 392. Amanda Griffiths is back. She's with the Libertarian Party Alliance in the USA here. She lives in Wisconsin. She's a grad student, and we're going to talk about some things that have been going on here. One thing I wanted to ask Amanda about was this Austin Petersen, who gets some things right and some things wrong, put out this manifesto for Libertarian Nationalists. And it's here. And I think I don't disagree with everything, but it's funny how I try to emphasize that I have agreement with people on some things, but I just want to dissect this whole thing. I gave you a link to that, Amanda. I don't know if you see it or not.
Yes, I've got it open.
And Austin Petersen ran for president in 2016, did not get the nomination. Now he has the Wake Up America show. He's libertarian on a lot of things. He actually worked for the LP a while back, but he's kind of went here. So I don't know. And he's a big fan of Javier Milei, which I do appreciate. So I think that alone proves he's at least serious about winning, but winning what is the exact question. So he talks about, he did end up supporting Trump, and he's talking about libertarian nationalism builds the future. And so he delivered this in Denver, Colorado on the 18th of October. And I'm just going to go on. For too long, libertarianism has been a beautiful philosophy stranded in the clouds. It debated purity while losing power. It praised freedom in theory while surrendering it in practice. The Libertarian Party became a clown car of fringe radicals and unserious thinkers, mocked even by those who once loved it. He's not wrong about that. And meanwhile, the populist state of MAGA, messy, raw, but undeniably patriotic, proved that millions of Americans still crave liberty, which seems like even if they are no longer call it by that name, they despise bureaucracy, globalism, and the arrogance of Washington. They love enterprise, faith, and flag. What do you think about that, Amanda?
I think they love the words. So at LP Alliance, we did a less charitable commentary on this manifesto that I'm going to give here. We looked through it when it first came out. We had a few criticisms, had a few laughs on our live stream. So when I read this, and it's interesting because you sent me another essay a few days ago, and I saw them as being quite similar in that it seems that there will be libertarians, particularly American libertarians, who find libertarianism and are enamored with some of the policy prescriptions that American libertarianism espouses. Usually it's free market and non-intervention, things like that. They mistake the policy prescriptions for the ideology itself, so that a lot of American libertarianism becomes an ideology that attempts to retrofit itself around the policy prescriptions rather than beginning from a first principle, say, of self ownership, and then finding the policies from there. And so then what ends up happening is people see these, see these policy prescriptions and can't always find a way to make them fit in the same way within their framework. What happens then is they say, well, libertarianism is this inchoate philosophy. It doesn't mean anything. It's too vague. It's straight into the clouds, as Petersen says. And it has it gives me the sense of someone who is saying that software won't work because there's no hardware. Ideology provides the hardware. Policy preferences are the software. And a lot of these criticisms of libertarianism that I think Petersen is trying to resolve in libertarian nationalism come from the notion that there are these policy preferences, but I don't have a firm intellectual grounding in why these policy preferences are important. And so it feels like a mess. There is an intellectual tradition of libertarianism that goes back to first principles, but in a lot of American libertarianism, I see people trying to work backwards, and then they find that there's not much at bottom, and they try to reconstruct something else. For Petersen, I thought a lot of this essay just kind of reeked of milquetoast conservatism, which again might be less charitable than he deserves, but it didn't seem radical. It wasn't even offensive. It didn't seem libertarian at all. It seemed like standard conservatism.
And in a way it does, because, when so many people, when I hear the word patriotism, I immediately think of, well, we got to support every war that they tell us to support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what he's doing here. And I think that has created a backfire effect where a lot of libertarians have become very unpatriotic, which I can't blame them for that reason alone. It's, I don't say I've gotten to the point where I despise. I mean, I just say that, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington have nothing to do with this country anymore. And I
Mm-hmm.
sincerely believe that.
Right. Right.
They're aliens to America.
Right.
And, and I don't think libertarians are ashamed of their heritage, although he claims, a people ashamed of their heritage cannot defend their rights. So, and I'll do his credit, Austin does seem to know history, and he knows the founding fathers. So,
Yeah. And libertarianism is a rich intellectual tradition, right? There's American libertarianism, there's European libertarianism. It's weird because a lot of the misreading of libertarianism is policy first and ideology second. I tend to see that among American libertarians for whatever reason. But there is a rich intellectual tradition that libertarians have, and I think you nailed it, Chris, because it's not as though our country today is doing a particularly good job of upholding that tradition, whether that's the tradition of American founders, whether it's a European libertarian tradition. It's more that we've gone very far afield because our politics is so non-ideological now, and we're seeing the results of that.
yeah, and I don't know, there's some other things here too, there is some anarchism in the party, and we also, reject the pacifism, which he means not getting involved in nations that refuse to act until attacked soon vanish from the map. I mean,
Yes.
how do you know who's going to attack you?
I mean, we do have better intel today than I think we used to. We have good signals. I think this is where Petersen actually is, again, touching on something that is important to critique, but maybe not in the best way. In libertarianism, we talk a lot about what people call the non-aggression principle. And sometimes people misread what's called the non-aggression principle and think that it means, that is the premise of our entire philosophy. And so we can't attack. We can't do any of this. We can only respond to aggression far, far, far after the fact. I prefer to talk about a non-aggression corollary, which is that we reject the initiation of force. Why? And there's a reason for why we reject the initiation of force. That's the principle. Usually, my sense is that it has to do with the principle of self-ownership. libertarianism can't be rooted in a fundamental negative. The principle of non-aggression comes from a respect and a reverence for self-ownership. And so really it's the self-ownership that's the principle. The non-aggression is the corollary. But what Austin Petersen is pointing out here is that when we are only coming from a place of negating aggression and not understanding why, what we're defending when we negate aggression, we are never able to act. I do agree with him there. I don't think that the critique is well placed.
Yeah, I mean, I go there from here, the whole, and, and I mean, how do you, it's kind of like, well, we need to arrest this person before they commit the crime.
Mhm.
Nobody has that kind of knowledge.
Right.
Finally, we reject the cultural hedonism. Now, I don't, this is a tough thing here because I think the Libertarian Party would certainly do better if it had a bunch of people, who were, family people. And I mean, I welcome the porn stars and the prostitutes, but that's part of the beauty is that these people can live together. But I don't know if I necessarily want those people to be front and center, but it's because that's the,
No,
but that doesn't mean, we can say that people have a right to do something and still say you shouldn't do that.
exactly, exactly. And again, there's a difference between saying, I don't approve of this myself, I wouldn't live my life in this way, and saying, I reject what I'm referring to as hedonism, which is always fairly subjective. I reject this because they don't jive with my values. Well, then as a party, we can't just reject it when it's somebody else in the way that they're living their life, right? Um, and again, it comes down to this misread of libertarianism as I want to be left alone. I just want to be left alone. A lot of libertarians do want to be left alone, but that isn't the premise of the philosophy. Again, it's a defense of self ownership, it's a defense of the individual. And the government does not exist to make sure that the rest of society leaves you alone. That involves risk, that involves, embracing change. You don't have to go along with it, but you also can't use the government or any type of state apparatus to keep you from encountering things that make you uncomfortable. That's not what libertarianism is about. And that's what I hear Petersen advocating for in a lot of this portion of his writing.
One of the things I find very annoying in the liberty movement, and it's one of those things. It's one of those things that every time it comes up, I just find myself more annoyed. Is let's say somebody has, somebody's in the hospital with, diabetes and cancer, and I will say like, well, that person really shouldn't be eating those sugary donuts. And somebody will, and immediately there's some libertarian out there will come out and say, he's got a right to do that. And I'm like, I never said they didn't have a right to do that. That somehow that this equating of criticism of unwise behavior is somehow violation of a right. That drives me nuts.
It is really strange. The older I get, the more I realize that it's terrible. The more I realize that a lot of people cannot make the distinction innately between you choosing not to do something and you wanting other people to be forced not to do something, or vice versa. There seems to be this notion that um, there's no difference between choosing to do a thing and being forced to do a thing. And there is a huge difference. There's a difference in the way that someone thinks about an action if they choose to do it versus whether they're coerced to do it. And so, yeah, I agree with you that you can absolutely criticize someone, and you're not saying the government should keep someone from doing this thing. It's a very important distinction. We need to lean into it more and you know, make it more visible that there is this difference between saying, I, as an individual, don't approve of that individual's choices, and saying, I want that individual to not be able to make those choices.
Yeah, and I don't understand why. I don't know how many it is, but there's always one who will scream. You could be in a room of people, and there's always one who will just scream and say, uh, you know, uh, it happens a lot, and the and not understanding these differences, I think, is a huge philosophical problem. It's
We saw it a
like I
lot,
said,
yeah. we saw it a lot with tech censorship, right? When you would have a private company that would fire someone for doing a thing, and we would say, well, the company maybe shouldn't have made that decision, and then that got conflated in bad faith with us saying the company should be prohibited from making that decision. No, if Elon Musk wants to kick someone off of his social media platform, he can. We don't necessarily think he should, and that's the difference.
Yeah, and now we get, to the Libertarian Nationalist Code. And I don't disagree with a lot, necessarily agree with liberty rooted in moral strength, not indulgence. I'm okay with that.
Mm.
A nation bound by shared ideals, not tribal division. Now, what those ideals are, it's hard to say, but I think ideals of, the founding fathers are good ones. Government that governs least but defends best. I mean, these are all kinds of vague, but you can certainly say defends best is, at least if you're actually defending the country, and governs least, also, but, puts criminals in jail. Free enterprise is the lifeblood of human dignity. The Constitution is the covenant of our civilization. Borders as the guardians of sovereignty. Again, that's also up for. I really think a lot of people have a lot of if you ask people for the details of what they think should be done about the borders, I think they all have a lot of different answers. But families is the foundation of liberty. I'm more and more agreeing with this. Uh,
The issue here, I think, is
yeah,
that a lot of it is very vague, right? So,
yeah.
what is moral strength? What is indulgence? That's very subjective. Um, you know, uh, Shared ideals. Okay, but what are those ideals?
I
Um,
think moral strength is just being able to say, I'm going to stand up for what I believe in.
Right, right. And so I guess integrity is good. But again, if it's what I believe in, then sometimes that can go against the shared ideals in a certain sense. There has to be a common sense of mission, I think, for any group of people that's going to work together. People need to be working together for a particular cause. Whether we want to call that shared ideals, I don't know whether it goes that far holistically. I like your definition of moral strength. I guess I would call that integrity. But again, that goes back to individualism, right? I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. Well, maybe what I believe in isn't necessarily everything that the nation is calling its ideals. So you have a little bit of a contradiction there. Um, you know, Families is the foundation of liberty. Property rights is sacred as and enforceable. Yeah, people interpret property rights differently. There are beliefs about that there being a difference between private property and personal property. So and civilization over barbarism is quite subjective. Um, a lot of this is vague, and that's one of my issues with it. Is it's vague and because it's vague, easily
Yeah.
weaponized.
Well, yeah, and some people would say civilization over barbarism. Well, if that's the case, then the civilized have the right to do whatever they want to the barbarians, which I think opens up a huge can of worms.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, Leadership through merit, courage, and service. I think that's. Uh, I think this is something. We very much have a crisis of leadership in this
Yes.
world we live in.
Yeah.
We don't have leaders anymore. We just have managers,
Mhm.
and I
Middle managers too.
You know,
They don't
I
like
you know, I s I mean, my last job, I remember said, "Don't call them leadership, call them management, because 'cause they're not leaders." It's
right.
so, I say nowadays too, really the only place where you see true leadership anymore is sports.
Hmm. Yeah, you see that.
You see a great football coach or a great coach who leads a team to victory. I mean, it's so he's
It's
right about a lot of these things here too. It's
We do have a crisis of leadership. I think part of that also comes from misinterpreting leadership as something that a person is vested with, right? That someone is a leader. Leadership is more of a quality that is cultivated through action, like in community with others, right? Um, a leader is not necessarily someone who is hierarchically in charge or has some hierarchical authority. A leader is the person who is responsible for creating the environment that allows leadership itself to be created and flourish, and that happens between all the individuals in the community. I don't see that happening certainly in our government. I don't see really anyone in our leadership as being concerned with creating the qualities that are necessary for individuals to become leaders, for citizens to become leaders, I think that's a huge threat to them. But yeah, absolutely a crisis of leadership. I agree with you. And I don't really see how we fix it by glorifying any particular nation or state over another.
Well, and sometimes it just happens naturally. I mean, I knew a guy who was in Haiti, and people would treat him like he's American. He knows what he's doing. Or, you got four people walking around the neighborhood and they don't know where they are. But, well, you seem like you know where to go. Maybe let's follow you. And it's just how those things emerge. There's always qualities where these things happen. So I think there's not a whole, this actually isn't that long.
It's not.
Government is law.
We were also laughing about that when we reviewed it in NLP Alliance, just that this is not really a manifesto. It's kind of a listicle. There's not elaboration on any of these things. So it's very easy to tear apart, right? There is
Yeah.
not theory behind what we're supposed to be doing.
Well,
Yeah.
we're in such a soundbite culture that I don't think Austin wanted to make this too long.
Well, exactly.
I think he understands that.
But that's the issue, right? I think there are some things that we need to fight for. And if we want to make politics ideological again, which we need to, because otherwise it just becomes a slew of policy preferences with no grounding and nothing enduring. And this is what leads to the false criticisms of libertarianism that we see. We do need to push back and say it's important to have these more ideological debates. The way to make them interesting is to be interested in them. That's always been the trick for me. That's always been the trick. When I read long things when I can tell that the writer cares and when I feel more intelligent for reading it. There is a hunger for long form discussion, but too quickly, I think our reverence for marketing expertise and advertisements makes it difficult for us to realize that no, what makes people bored when they read is that it's just regurgitating information with no thought or care or variation behind it, right? It's the same thing that, like the old method of traditional schooling, people didn't retain things because it was just facts being spouted at them and it was very, very boring. We've now evolved to realize no, when people get involved in their learning and when learning is individualized, people retain information more. That should be the same thing when it comes to our writing and the way that we discuss things. When we discuss things with depth, people do engage with it. So again, I think Austin has, witnessed a phenomenon yet again and made an error about what should be done about it.
Yeah, and he talks about government law. This is all pretty good stuff. Sunset agencies, return power to the states, require every regulation to be explicitly authorized. That would be amazing. Relocate departments and end civil service tenure and abolishing unconstitutional agencies. Sound money, balance budgets, cut corporate welfare before and foreign aid before touching a dime to earn income. Decouple critical industries from China. Promote onshoring and hemispheric trade and trusted allies like Argentina or even India, preferable to China. Replace. He's definitely not a fan of China, which
right.
I can
I'm not either.
I can understand that.
Right. I'm not either, to be fair. And a lot of what China does for us, we could do if we rolled back regulations. We see this with rare earths. We actually have the capacity right now, without building any new mines, to satisfy about 60% of the global rare earth demand. We don't do it because of outdated nuclear regulations that erroneously mislabel trailings as nuclear waste byproducts. So we can't do anything with the rare earth materials that we can actually manufacture today without opening new mines. So yeah, I'm not a fan of China, and I'm not a fan of how our policies prop up the CCP when they really don't have to.
I wonder a lot of times how some of these the companies will say we're not leaving, we're being thrown out. When you have these regulations and stuff that make them want to leave, and it's just easier to do this work elsewhere.
Yeah.
And in some cases, was even the cases with the territories, like Puerto Rico or American Samoa, for example. Some of the territories for a while were not subject to minimum wage laws, so they would do things there that they wouldn't do here because they didn't have to worry about the minimum wage laws. And finally, replace the income tax with a simplified consumption-based system. Is he saying national sales tax? Oh my God.
I've heard arguments for it. I've heard arguments against it. Our income tax system definitely needs to be resolved.
I
I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on that.
I just cringe. I always cringe when the attitude, we're gonna of adding a better tax and getting rid of worse tax just doesn't.
Mhm.
It just always scares the crap out of me, and you might end up stuck with both.
Yeah, that's fair.
Uh, it's similar to a trade off. We'll lower the gas tax and reduce the gas but increase the gas tax on cigarettes, or
Mhm,
okay,
mhm.
yeah. Culture and education reinforce the family as the central institution of liberty. This has actually very much become an issue for me. Not, but maybe not in some of the ways that some people say, because we have all this stuff, where parents are losing their kids. Agencies are trying to tell parents how to run their kids' lives and
Mhm.
or how to raise their kids. And I do think this is, I think this is an issue. Although I'm not really sure what he means by this.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is what family is the central institution of liberty. I have no idea what that means. I don't know, have no idea how the family is the central institution of liberty. If you grew up with the family that worships Chairman Mao, is the family the central institution of liberty? Um, so I don't know what it means. I also think, unfortunately, parents are not perfect, and they're so willing a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times you have parents that are willing to defer to authorities, whether those are federal authorities or those are other types of institutional authorities that are going to tell them what to do to their kids. Unfortunately, making it so that government can't force families to do something, while very appropriate, is not going to solve the problem, I don't think, of certain families being very susceptible to different types of influence.
And there are situations, for example, where maybe parents are refusing a necessary medical procedure,
Mhm.
but I don't know where I draw the line here. Just during coronavirus, there was that voice inside my head saying, "Don't interfere with parents," and yet I see these kids wearing masks in public places, and there's a part of me that just wants to open my mouth, and I think, I didn't say a word to him, but I think just by looking at the kids and saying, "Oh,
Yeah,
he's not wearing a mask," maybe that'll get something through to the kids. But
yeah, yeah. And I think so. I think kids are smarter than we want to give them credit for, and I think kids are better at making choices than we want to give them credit for. Obviously, not with everything, but when it comes to something like that, I'm in favor of erring on the side of giving the child more autonomy rather than less. Children have a naturally rebellious streak, and I think it should be encouraged. Um, to the fullest of basically to the fullest of what is reasonable or logical.
we could do a whole nother show on
Yeah,
children
I'm
rights and
sure.
all
I'm
that
sure.
stuff. You know, uh, Protect children from sexual exploitation and gender experimentation. Now I know what he means here.
Mhm.
This is one area, yes, where I agree that I absolutely positively want to outlaw this. I mean, some of this stuff, although that doesn't fix corrupted science. I mean,
Right.
I'd even be go as far as saying I'm going to outlaw circumcision of male babies. I don't think there's any reason for it. But again, you're going down a road here though where you don't want the government interfering in everything.
Exactly. Exactly.
And Amanda, I know based on my own experience now, I was at a time young when tonsillectomies were a fad.
Yeah.
Eh,
Yeah. I came after that, but I do remember a lot of times people would just have their tonsils removed, or people a
Yeah,
little bit older than me had them removed for no reason.
and just because you got tonsillitis, and I remember being in the hospital and just it's it's so there are things that happen that aren't always perfect. And medicine, I think medicine is always going to be it's always going to be a little bit experimental.
Mhm.
I knew a guy who wanted to do it. Down in the rainforest, they start serving their kids the frog medicine
Mhm.
at 8 years old, and it's actually I think if some people saw it, they almost would consider it child abuse, but it's something they
Mhm.
do in the rainforest. It's considered normal. And, my guy who would give me the combo for frog medicine, he says, no, I'm not going to do that to my kid because people would ask a bunch of questions.
Yeah, yeah.
But, it's, so, but yeah, it's,
Medicine's hard too because there is so much. Our, our medical research system is very flawed and very corrupted, right? It's all
yeah,
about how can you get you know, the government funding for things, or what's insurance going to pay for? Well, insurance is going to pay for what benefits them, and then what the government will pay for, because the government really does set the prices, because if the government is in charge of Medicare, the government is basically in charge of setting healthcare prices. So it all comes back to what is the easiest thing? What is the easiest way for someone to cut a profit in a system where the government has such a huge footprint on both research and delivery of services and treatment? Um, it never works out well for the individual, whether that person's a child or an adult. And so when we talk about healthcare decisions and uh, returning bodily autonomy to people, it's so messy because there's so much government involvement in what we consider to be a good treatment or covered treatment or helpful or effective. It's almost impossible to cut out the noise and see what actually is going to be the best choice for you.
yeah, it is, and I don't know how, government's not going to fix corrupted science, and
Mhm.
I think what bothers me too with a lot of this stuff, I wouldn't put, regulations on kids getting earrings because that's something that really can't be permanent. But a lot of this stuff is stuff that's irreversible. It's the kind of damage that can be irreversible.
Right. Yeah.
I think they have some of those cases where they try to break your legs to make you taller. Yeah, I don't
Mhm.
think I'd want that being done on kids either.
Right. Right.
It's you have occasionally, teenage girls, unfortunately, who just get so big they have reduction surgery. It's because it's literally hurting their back.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things here that just uh that work out. Yeah.
Stupid.
Celebrate Western civilization in schools rather than apologize for it. All libertarians, as far as I know, I don't know very many libertarians, at least in America, that aren't pro-West.
Yeah, well, and what I did think was funny here is, so we have abolish federal involvement in education, return it to their parents and localities, and then celebrate Western civilization in schools rather than apologize for it. That sounds like there's going to be some kind of federal involvement in education that is crafting the curriculum to celebrate Western civilization. Presumably, if we return schooling to localities and there's a locality that doesn't want to celebrate Western civilization, presumably, according to these prescriptions, something would be done about that. So again, he's getting a little bit hypocritical, or there's something that's not being connected there. But yeah, I think that there are certainly values that we refer to as Western values that are, I think, admirable and should be upheld, to be forwarded. I don't know what the necessary benefit of referring to them as Western values is, right? These are values. These are things that we want to argue are good. Fine. I don't think that we need to say that a particular society or particular culture has claim to it. These are just good things that we want to argue are good for their own sake, not because they're Western.
That's true. But I think there are also things that made Western civilization successful. Here he goes in immigration and sovereignty, secure the border with technology, manpower, and law. I don't know what he means there. Make English the official national language.
I don't know why. I don't know why.
I think
Really don't.
that's the same issue, but uh, you
Yeah.
know, there's nothing in the Constitution that I think prescribes the government to have an official language. Although, the eliminate dual citizenship for elected officials. Ooh,
I think, again, you're encroaching on someone's personal choice there. I know what he's trying to do, right? He's trying to make sure that people aren't serving the interests of another country when they're in America. But once again, the important thing, and maybe this is a distinction of someone who's not a nationalist or doesn't define themselves as a nationalist, and someone who does. But I see ideals, principles, whatever, as being important. I don't care whether we attribute those ideals and principles to a particular country. What's wonderful about liberty is not that it's American. What's wonderful about self ownership is not that it's a Western value. It's good for its own sake. And so I think when we're talking once again about people not being able to have dual citizenship, we're missing the mark. Um, sure, we don't want people hurting our communities. But there are ways to address that more directly than simply by saying, well, I think the problem is dual citizenship, so I want to address that.
Well, yeah, and I would, I look at dual citizens, having multiple citizenships is just a way of, for the same reason you have multiple bank accounts.
Mhm.
You don't want the putting all your eggs into one basket, but I also understand that it can create a lot of conflicts of interest. If the government was doing less, this would be less of an issue.
That is also true.
And, and for example, would I require, okay, what happens if I'm running for mayor of Madison, Wisconsin, but he also owns a house in Minneapolis?
Mhm.
Is that considered? He's got dual residences. Is that also a conflict of interest? It's.
I wouldn't say so.
I mean,
But I
nobody
mean, the
was
people
nobody would say anything about that.
yeah.
Or if a few years later he ran for mayor of Minneapolis, it's
Mhm.
uh, so but there are certainly require civics proficiency for all naturalization applicants. I don't know exactly what goes into the citizenship, the applications for citizenship. I definitely believe that we shouldn't just hand out citizenships to
Mhm.
anybody, but you know, I don't think that's a bad idea, really.
It's a question of who's making that decision, right? And what does civics proficiency look like? As you can easily see someone whose policies you really don't agree with, whose ideas you really don't agree with, being in charge of what people are going to learn when they try to come into this country. And that's where I get a little bit frightened. But I do think, just an overall holistic education in in history and our nation's values, if you want to do some kind of citizenship naturalization process. Um, my question is always who gets to decide what civics proficiency is.
Language proficiency on citizenship. I believe in some countries, literally, you have to have people in your neighborhood attest to it.
Mhm.
I mean, and this is one thing. I have very different attitudes towards citizenship as I do toward immigration. Immigration can just be somebody coming here to have a cup of coffee. Citizenship is a completely different thing. It's you know, suspend entry from nations that sponsor or excuse terrorism. Okay, I understand the spirit of this, but I also say, well, what about the people who object to those things?
Yeah, what about people who are fleeing from it rather,
Yeah,
which
it's
is a huge.
that's a tough call. And another question too is how do you know? How do you know what if you ask them the questions, they're going to give you the answer that they think you want.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of Iranian immigrants fleeing the regime are amazing, and I definitely want people like that here. Are wonderful.
yeah,
So again, but you would definitely call Iran a sponsor of terror, of state terrorism.
yeah. Defense and foreign policy. Okay, maintain the most powerful military on earth, but deploy it only for defense of our people and our civilization. I don't know why. I don't know how powerful our military needs to be, but yeah, in the forever wars of globalist adventurism. Okay, that's good. Strengthen alliances that defend liberty, withdraw from those that do not. Reject both isolationism and empire, whatever. If he means just, we only trade with ourselves by isolationism, then I'm not,
And yeah,
yeah,
these are not very well articulated because you're correct that it's you don't know what it means when he says it, and it sounds so much of the time like he's speaking in code, right? And I don't know what he means. I have ideas about what he means about some of these, but he should just come out and say it. These are not policy prescriptions. Policy prescriptions, which he's calling them, are very specific, are talking about very particular things. None of these is a policy prescription. These are maybe values that you should think about when making policy, but that's not a prescription.
and he also says prepare for new theaters of conflict. I don't know what that means exactly. Like he's planning for war. It's
I do think it's good to have new military R&D. I think we need to reform that system entirely because it basically rewards going to war for absolutely no reason as it is now. Cyber defense is a really promising frontier because of its ability eh, to end in less loss of life. And yet there are also a lot of risks, right? When you have AI missile targeting or whatever, that's a problem. So again, I want to see this more articulated. I think it's good to be looking into new theaters of conflict. We're not going to be using muskets anymore. We're probably not going to be engaging in trench warfare, but I need to know what this looks like a little bit better.
well, things like hacking your electrical
Yeah.
grid or something like that.
Yeah.
Now then finally we get to America First, Civilization United. And the answer is because civilization is a team sport. Defense says, we support Israel, not out of sentimentality, but because it stands as a shield between barbarism and the West. It fights the same enemies that once sent pirates to the shores of Tripoli. It upholds the same principles of law, industry, and individual conscience that define our civilization.
This is
Okay.
very, very coded, anti-Islamic rhetoric. I'm going to go ahead and say that.
Well, yeah.
The same enemies that once sent pirates to the shores of Tripoli. Yes. Um, Talks about radical Islam. I'm no fan of radical Islam. This is definitely dog whistling to people who have more malignant intentions. I think there.
Yeah, giving the foreign aid to Israel. Yeah, I mean, I don't, I just, from a practical standpoint, I often say the main problem with Israel is that it unifies all these people
Mm,
and that keeping them divided would be better. But we ended up we were doing just fine for all those years without Israel. So,
mm.
and I can't really say that I don't think anybody can really argue that we've been doing better since then.
I wouldn't know. I don't like, and that's the thing is you don't know what goes on behind the scenes, right? So
Yeah.
you don't know what intel has been shared and what's been particularly helpful. Um, but the thing too is I'm individual first. I'm people first. America has, had some episodes of being a great force for uh, upholding individual liberty, and there it also has had some episodes of definitely not upholding individual liberty. I don't know what the utility of saying America first for its own sake is. I am individual first. I am people first. I am self ownership first. That to me is all more important than saying the name of any country first, because as we've seen, as you mentioned from the outset, Chris, the America of today is very different from the America of the founding. It doesn't bear a whole lot of resemblance. Donald Trump does not bear much resemblance to our founding fathers, in many respects. So, America first for its own sake, I can't get behind it.
Yeah, and again, it's our loyalty is, he goes on, free world deters radical Islam.
Mhm.
I don't know. I often wonder, why did radical Islam always been here? I mean, I haven't looked at that.
Yes, I mean
Well,
it
has
has
it
right.
always been quite to this level though? I mean, there wasn't a World Trade Center incident 100 years ago.
We also weren't very as globally connected
Yeah,
as we are now. I mean, there are definitely radical stripes of any religion, any faith system that want to do violence against people who don't belong to that faith system. And unfortunately, there has been, I think, partly because of nation building policies from the US and from the Soviet Union in the way back, that has strengthened the growth of radical Islamic terror organizations, violent organizations. So it was always there. We weren't as globally connected to suffer as a result of it. But again, he's calling it out as a single issue. And uh, radical Islam is certainly not the only threat to America. It's certainly not the only threat to the world. The biggest threat to the world is totalitarianism. Radical Islam is simply just one of many iterations of totalitarianism. So to single it out and to say that's the problem is actually a lot of hand waving.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things here. And he says, yeah, yeah, and I don't, and I don't know how necessary, why, for example, I don't see radical Islam in Malaysia, and I visited Malaysia a while back. So it's really, there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of stuff here that yeah, I think it's very complicated, and I don't necessarily think that supporting, but I do also believe, if you keep kicking the hornet's nest, don't be shocked when they come and sting you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, America's a huge target. America's very powerful. I
Yeah,
wouldn't necessarily want to be weakened just so that I wouldn't be a target. But uh, yeah, it's we have certainly I think we've certainly contributed to these problems in many ways. We're not the only force that has. People have agency. People have intentions that are adverse to American intentions and will fight them. Countries sometimes will do terrible things, even if America does nothing. But that doesn't mean that we have been blameless in stoking some of these conflicts for our own benefit.
yeah. Well, there were 2 bombings in Argentina back in the '90s, and, they've been connected to Iran, and now Argentina is a country that was not sticking its nose really in any Middle Eastern business. So that's a case where I definitely think, yes, this was certainly totally unprovoked,
Hmm.
and so I think that has impacted Argentina ever since, just, yeah, but so yeah, America's military, again, he's just basically coming on favor of Israel. And I don't, and when I hear other people, like Safety talk about how constantly writes, about land theft,
Hmm.
and he says that's been Israel's policy from the day one. I said, yeah, well, how is that civilizations?
Mm. Yeah, it's. I think there's. It's it's interesting because I once again we choose to involve ourselves with one country or another, and I think that's fine to involve ourselves and ally with countries to our benefit in our interests. We need to be more honest about what we're doing. Um, and at the same time, I really hate when people say that, okay, well, America caused all of these problems all over the world. Anytime there's a conflict, it is America's fault. Uh, no, people have particular designs and intentions that we can certainly, as more powerful nations, we can certainly play into, and we can certainly either assist or hinder. But nations and people do things. They are free agents. They are independent actors, and not everything bad that happens in the world is America's fault. Just as not everything bad that happens in the world is America's responsibility to fix.
Yeah, and I do think to a certain extent there are, and he now goes, libertarian nationalism refuses to apologize for progress, conquest, or civilization itself. Okay, progress and civilization I'm for. I'm not necessarily for
Snuck
conquest.
conquest into there, which,
Yeah.
it's ballsy, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, and I do think a lot of modern libertarians are infected by leftist guilt, and they do adopt a lot of that same language. But I don't know any libertarians who are tearing down statues, sneering at the founders, or sneering at the founders. Some of them are praising tyrants abroad, though. I
When
got to.
people praise Putin, I think absolutely, and occasionally I've seen libertarians do that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
Maduro is the one that gets me a lot more
okay,
because I know lots of Venezuelans, but because there's this attitude now that, well, the feds told me to hate him, so I got to like him, and
yeah, yeah,
and
totally.
sometimes your enemy's enemy is still your enemy.
Yes, yeah. Um, there's this notion that, okay, well, it's very edgy for me to like who the government says that I'm supposed to hate. Which again, decide for yourself who your enemies are and who your allies are. It's not
Right.
just reflexively, I have to support who the government tells me to support, or I have to support who the government tells me is my enemy. People think more critically, it'll really help.
He also says, we reject successionism, which I understand, but I don't know how you fix the current system. Sometimes successionism is the only way to fix things.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of revolution. I don't think all revolution needs to be violent or bloody. Although I guess it depends on how you define violence
Yeah.
these days. But I don't think all revolution needs to necessarily end mass bloodshed. But I do believe in radical change. I don't think that that comes simply from petitioning government to please, please, please be nice to us. I think the government does have to be afraid of people.
This is why I think the breakup of Czechoslovakia was just so amazing and remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally just said, "We're dividing. Okay, bye bye, bye
Yeah.
bye."
Yeah. It's rare. But
That really is a beautiful thing. It's I think he really just wants us to keep growing the country. Our manifest destiny is not dead. See stars. I mean, he wants us to
I don't know what
have
he
good
means by
sights on the moon. I guess.
yeah, that's the thing is that's when I was reading, I was like, what is he trying to colonize? Because it sounds very colonial. I'm trying to figure out, is it Greenland? Where is he trying to go? And could not figure that out. So when he says our manifest destiny is not, I don't know what. That was one of those places where I felt like he was speaking in code, and I couldn't even figure out what the code was.
Well, if we get the ability to do it, we may go out into space. I
Yeah,
don't.
that's fair. But when he talks as well about and maybe I'm skipping ahead, so you can jump back. But when he talks about libertarianism calling for a new generation of liberty leaders who are doers, not talkers, you have to be both. And this is the entire problem. This is the problem that spawned this essay, this so-called manifesto, is that he was looking at the policy ideas of American libertarianism and trying, as many people have, to retrofit an ideology that supported it, and then seeing that other people's retrofitted ideology didn't look like his, and so then made the declaration that libertarianism was empty. But it's not empty. It's the fact that so often in America, in particular, libertarians start from the software and try to fit the hardware around it, which is exactly the wrong way to go about doing things. You start from the first principles, and then policy preferences are fungible, right? So we need doers, thinkers, talkers. They all need to be the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know. Can you give me an example of starting with the software and fitting with the hardware? Because you use that analogy quite a bit.
Yeah. So are you talking about the when I see that happen?
Yeah,
Um, so I think when you sent me an essay that was by Bidinotto, who talks about libertarianism and why it's a problem.
yeah, and that
And
was written in the '80s, by the way. I just want to
yes,
let you know that. Yeah,
yes, I
it's not recent, but
figured it was
I
older.
read that years ago, and it's
Yeah. Um, and what he does is he talks about these like the free market principles, and Peterson does this as well. The free market principles of libertarianism talks about what libertarianism looks like, right? And maybe Peterson, because his writing is shorter, is a little bit easier for us to do this with. Um, but he talks about free markets. He talks about the let's see, order, property, family, merit, and nation. He talks about the Declaration of Independence and decentralization. So these are all outcomes. These are all outcomes that come from a particular way of thinking, a particular set of principles. But decentralization itself, an outcome is not a principle, it's a material manifestation of a particular principle. So what he does then is he says, okay, well, how how do I create a philosophy that opposes, or rather, that supports decentralization or that supports free markets? And because he's not starting, and he's certainly not alone in this, because he's not starting with principles like self ownership, because he's not starting with an argument for why, in particular, or rather, what should be upheld. What is good? What is a good thing? How should society be organized? However you want to phrase it, he's starting with the outcome that he wants to see, and he's working back and trying to create a set of principles that support that outcome. I think anytime we do that, we're getting it backwards. Because I could think that free markets are good for a completely different reason than you do. We could both call ourselves libertarians and we'd be at odds. If we both agree that self ownership is a value, we're both going to get to a similar set of policy prescriptions, maybe they won't be identical, but we'll be debating about what the right policy should look like. So we won't be having these disagreements about what are our first principles. We will be having disagreements about what those principles look like in action. So that's the hardware software analogy, where the hardware is the ideology, the hardware is the principles, and the software is what form do those principles take, what programs do those principles run, and that changes.
Yeah, they're okay. So from there we go, this movement is not a retreat for principle, but we're to return to purpose. He praises Millet when a libertarian decides to lead. I mean, I agree with that. Set fire to took the you remind the world that ideas are nothing without courage. I sometimes do think there's not really a whole lot of courage in our movement, and I think it definitely
True.
needs that. And
It's very true.
the era of think tank libertarians is over. The era of libertarian statesmen begins. Well, I think we do need some think tank libertarians. I mean, we're always going to need those,
Right.
but
We need people to do everything. We need people to think. We need people to lead. And again, leadership is created by, rather, leaders are those who create the qualities that enable others to self-actualize and work toward a common cause together. Um, and be inspired by one another. We need everything. It's whether you want to call them think tank libertarians or something else. We need people who are going to think deeply about this stuff, and then we need folks who are going to act. Ideally, they should be the same people. I don't really believe in siloing roles. Maybe people naturally fall more into one role or another, but I think everyone should kind of explore everything. This
yeah,
is not an age for people who can only do one thing.
the time for theory has ended. The time for action begins. Yeah, he's not wrong about a lot of these things. I definitely think there's, I wasn't in here, but he once talked about, he says that he thinks a lot of libertarians are allergic to charisma. And I said,
Yes,
yeah,
I believe that. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think this essay is doing him favors, but yeah, I think that the theory, um, neglecting theory is the problem. Acting without thinking of the theory is just as much of a vice as only having your head in the clouds and theorizing about all these principles without thinking about how they can be put into practice. Both of them are vital, and it is really a detriment to our movement when any of us just focus on one or the other.
yeah, I think there's I do think there's, you look how Millet acts. He has fun. I mean,
But
you know,
man, there's a lot about the theory. So sorry, go on.
he has this theory, and it's a crude way to put it, Amanda. But there are a lot of people in those rallies who want to vote for Millet, but I think there are probably a lot of women in those rallies who want to have sex with him too.
I mean, that's fair.
And I think that makes a big difference.
It does. It does. And people should work on being charismatic. People should.
Yeah.
I think, you know, anything that you can use to the advantage of the cause that you're working for, you should use. Whether that's
Yeah, it's so, I don't know where we really go from there. I mean, I think he's really just putting that out for the anti-Israel. And I don't know. And the hard thing about how people are attitudes toward Israel, I don't know if they're sincere. I don't know if they're getting paid off. It's could be
yeah,
one or the other.
yeah.
I or are they? Because I'm really getting to a point where I don't think there are that many people who have sincere beliefs at all anymore.
That's the unfortunate thing. But again, that's the problem. That's the issue with rejecting theory. I think everyone should work on having a coherent, holistic political ideology. But you don't do that by starting from, okay, what policies do I want to see implemented? You ask yourself deeply, what is important to me? Why is that important? That's the axiological component. Why does what matters matter? Um, and go from there. The policies that you want to see are going to change sometimes over time, and we have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But people need to think more deeply and not be content with just thinking because I don't know, I'm an existentialist. I think the only way that you realize value in the world is by actually acting. So things become meaningful because you act as though they're meaningful. And that's what we should be doing in politics.
Well, some of these pundits, I think they're preaching whatever. Maybe they have one or two big donors who pays them to preach something.
Right.
Yeah, some of them, I think, also they're really just they're not really leading the audience. They're kind of following the audience.
Yes, of course.
The
That's
Gail Winan types, and then I think if you're in the case of one person, I think, and I don't know if this happens with men, but it definitely happens with some women that they just go with whatever their boyfriend or husband or baby daddy believe.
mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Um, and I've definitely seen it happen with men too. Um,
yeah,
but, yeah, I've seen it happen with women a ton. Um, yeah, it's this is the tragedy of influencers, right? Is they're called influencers, but really they're completely influenced by whoever's paying them the most money, whatever interest group is in their pocket, whatever's gonna get them likes. So it's not about them being able to influence other people at all. It's about somebody coming up to them and saying, "Hey, you've got you 6 million followers. So why don't you believe this? And or at least act like you do." So they're the ones who are being influenced.
and I've seen it happen where some people literally, because they took a stand, they lost everything. It's
Yep.
where they lost a lot of their. I had had a friend who was really good on medical issues and what he called white coat cartels. He wanted a free market in medicine. Completely went nuts during coronavirus, and he said my audience hated me because they were libertarians, and he wasn't advocating for libertarian positions anymore.
Mhm.
I don't know, but it does make me want. But so that kind of tells me he was sincere about, even though he's wrong. But I don't know if there's even cases where maybe people are getting threatened to preach certain things. It's hard to say, but I don't know. Yeah, I did. If you wanted to, did you read that other essay I sent you?
I did, and so I mean, I said some
Yeah,
of what I already wanted to, right? That which I
yeah.
where I think that this person's going wrong. I also think in general, there is a there's ignorance that a lot of Americans have about libertarianism as a broader tradition that isn't just constitutional American libertarianism. Um, it's scary because not all libertarianism in the world looks in terms of policy the way that our libertarianism looks today. Um, Libertarianism, anarcho-communism, libertarian socialism, these all come from the notion of self-ownership in a time when the state was completely in charge of who got to make money, who got to have private property, and who didn't. So when you start from that premise, it makes sense to say, all right, well, we should all have things in common because that's the only way that we can really be self owners. Otherwise, we're going to be conscripted into labor and exploited. Are things different now? Yes, absolutely. But the writing and the actual theoretical tradition there is still extremely valid. The idea of voluntary self organization, whether that self organization is more egalitarian, um, is still valid. Um, any type of anti-totalitarianism can be argued to be a form of libertarianism, but this is what it comes back to: is what is our principle that we all believe in. All libertarians that I know have some sense of self-ownership being paramount. And that takes a lot of different forms. Doesn't mean that libertarianism is nebulous and vague, as the author says. What it means is that we need to get really specific about what our principles are ideologically, and then yeah, we do have fights about what policies we should uh, we should be accommodating. But that means that our policies are fungible, and they should be. The policies that we support should be fungible, whereas our principles should not be. So this is really, I think, Vinodotas is uh, making the same error that I saw Peterson making, which is just, I think libertarianism is about free markets. What is the correct theory that supports free markets? Um, and then not seeing a coherent intellectual tradition around it, because there are a lot of theories that support free markets. So, of course, you're not going to think that libertarianism is a coherent intellectual tradition if you start with the policy manifestation of a particular type of libertarianism.
Yeah, and I think there's another problem too is, well, the non-aggression principle. I mean, it's not a virtue. virtue is an action. I mean, just saying, "Oh, I won't hurt you." That's not a virtue. I mean,
Yeah, I
virtue is a positive action.
I'm happy to hear you
So
say that.
I think that's something maybe libertarians aren't getting from this, and so maybe they need to take up other things that give them a sense of purpose.
I've
I
done a
do.
lot. Yeah, I've done a lot of writing on this. That I think that again, it's a non-aggression corollary, right? That non-aggression comes an opposition to coercion. Yeah, comes from what I think is um, a, a preference for a lauding of self-ownership for the individual. And saying that non-aggression is a principle, you cannot predicate a political ideology on a purpose of inaction. You can't inaction. You cannot do it. It is suicidal because then you're a runner who can't get started. Um, and in politics, I've written this too. But in politics, we're already in an arena of aggression. In politics, you're always trying to impose something on someone else. So that is always a type of aggression. Um, you can't talk about non-aggression with any kind of coherence when you're talking about political activity. So I completely agree with you that we have to be for something. We have anything that we're against, we have to be against it because we are for something primarily.
I think that's where Milei succeeded. I think Milei attacks the caste, but he also still keeps the vision of what he wants. Amanda, I do wonder sometimes if libertarianism is naturally going to go in a woke direction, and I've been
Mhm.
thinking about this a lot lately, and because there also seems to be a problem for some libertarians that they can't tell the difference between the football player and the cheerleader.
Yeah, yeah, fair.
And it's like, if I'm cheering on something bad, if I'm happy, for example, that something bad happened, that's the same as I made it happen.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
mean, I can.
I think libertarians need to be able to recruit broader audiences. I think that a lot of the people we need to be looking at today are people who are more radical because of being dissatisfied with the current system. If we want radical change, we want to be recruiting people who are going to create that radical change. Um, and people who are very milk toast are not going to be helpful to the movement in the immediate or short, maybe even medium term. We need to be looking at folks who are more radical. We need to be careful about that, obviously. I think that's where a distinction between I don't want to call it code switching, but people speak particular languages, right? If I am talking to somebody who is very, very progressive, I'm not going to come in and start talking about how corporations' taxes are too high. I'm not going to do that. I might go in and I might start talking to them about how corporations are not people, that individuals are people. And when we're talking about rights, they belong to individuals, not corporations. Um, I would go that route. But it's a difference between speaking the language that people are used to in order to make an argument that is our own. We can't get those flipped. We can't sacrifice the principles that we have uh, in order to recruit other people. But we do need to be able to understand how others think. And theory of mind is so difficult for a lot of libertarians. We need to be able to understand how other people think and then how to talk to them from a place of first principles. But to do that, you've got to speak the right language.
Well, there's so much people out there who want to assume a hidden meaning or attach a hidden meaning. There was that one guy in the House who didn't want to release the Epstein files, and immediately, well, you must be in there. I said, no. And he explained why, but he was just immediately doubted, and people were questioning his motives. Uh, and I don't know what. And you have this, the difference between saying you want something to happen is not. And there's no, I do wonder though what I was saying earlier about going woke. I
Mhm.
think because we tend to go push. We tend to talk about people who have been victimized by the state, and therefore we become a haven for everybody who embraces victim culture.
Mhm. Yeah.
And victim culture is just wokeism. And So then you end up with people who are just always looking for victims, and they're always victim shopping, and that just creates this unbelievably horrible grift.
This is why the theory is important and the philosophy is important, but not in isolation. So, some things is what we've done at times in LP Alliance is like we found groups of people who are being oppressed by local policymakers and local ordinances, right? And we don't go over and just say, "Hey, you're a victim." But what we do is we enlist them in advocacy for a cause that is materially germane to them, that has a specific material harm that it's causing to them. And in learning how to agitate for that cause, they live libertarianism without being told, "Hey, have you considered libertarianism? Can I preach the gospel of libertarianism to you?" So you enlist them in an action, you enlist them in advocacy. And as long as we're at the helm of that advocacy and we're directing what it looks like, it's very easy to get people to start to see things in a particular way. We can use that to our advantage. Um, a lot of times when you talk about, well, how our beliefs form, they're formed through action. So if you get people engaged in fighting you call it victimization, whatever, in a particular way, in a way that is empowering to them, rather than that blames somebody else and says somebody else is responsible for fixing my problems, then I think it moves them in the right direction. But it has to come from a very thorough grounding of what the principles are, and then enlisting people in action around those principles.
Well, we do seem to have a I think because of all the disadvantages third party we have also, we tend to attract a lot of people who are just into excuse making.
Yeah.
And and I agree, and some of them are legitimate, but, it's but some necessarily, I mean, it's a way you gotta try to figure out a way around these. I'm sick to death of hearing about top 2, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't ever wanna hear about top 2 again.
Yeah.
I because that's always, so that's the excuse not to run for office at all.
Hmm.
And I just say, "Well, if you lose in the Super Bowl or lose in the game before the Super Bowl, what really makes a difference?"
Hmm.
But,
Yeah.
uh,
It's
you know
people see victory very narrowly in politics. It's, did I win office? Okay, that's a type of victory. What about, did I do an 8-month PR tour for libertarianism? What about, did I lose and then have the other losing candidates incorporate some of my policies into their platform because they lost, and they lost by the margin that I acquired? There are various types of victory that come with any kind of run for elected office. What's also true is that we can't just be contented with running for elected office. Not everyone in the country should be running for elected office, but everyone in the country matters as an activist, ideally. So we need to be empowering members in that way too, not just you're only good for door knocking, you're only good for phone backing. No, people have a lot of diverse skills. They should be, I don't know, marching in the streets, whatever they're good at doing. um, we need to be empowering our members in that way as well, in a more coordinated fashion than we have been doing, and not just treating our members like the only thing that they're good for is telling other people to vote for a particular person who's going to run their lives, maybe a little bit more gently than somebody else.
one thing I'd like to know is how do we need to attract more people who are winners in life. Gary Johnson was a successful businessman. If we had more, and I think successful businessmen would be our natural constituency.
Mhm. There are certainly one. I think right now there is a public appetite uh, against against corporatism in general, right? And you see this among libertarians, you see this among conservatives, among progressives. So I certainly think we need to be playing people who are high agency. I'm going to put it that way. Um, whether the victory that they win looks the same for all of them, I don't think it does. But we need to be working more on uh, on appealing to high agency people. I do think a lot of times businessmen, businesswomen uh, are convinced that they can only vote for one of the major parties, right? Because they have this particular way of doing things. That doesn't mean that we should stop trying to recruit them or look at them as donors. And sometimes they can be very lucrative, but I think we need to look for people who are going to be willing to take risks, going to be willing to do things differently, think outside the box, uh, high agency people in general in different fields.
Yeah, yeah, different fields. I mean, I certainly hope so. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
see, because I think if we go out and sound like winners, people are more likely to respect us too. I don't.
Yeah. Which is also why I don't think we can only be talking about how, okay, we're definitely going to win this election. Well, maybe we're not. I mean, we're a minor party. We have to be realistic. It'd be great if we did, but we can't make that our only battle. We can't make institutions of power our only arena of battle, because we are the out party in that respect. What we can win are a lot of like cultural victories. In fact, we've kind of been ignoring them, and by that I don't mean culture war. I mean stoking libertarian sentiment among the public at large. We can do that. We can advocate for particular policy changes in major ways. Absolutely agree with you that we need to be sounding more like we know what we're doing, and more confident in ourselves without sounding overly idealistic either.
Yeah, I had Donald Rainwater on my show recently, and then I had another person on after that. Right after that, and the contrast was quite interesting. I mean, Donald got 11.44% of the vote in 2020 because he went out and spoke out against the coronavirus nonsense. And then my other guy just he's a nice guy, but boy, I know how he was in 2020. It was just like, oh, they told us to stay at home.
Yeah,
That's too bad.
yeah, yeah. That was a huge, huge failure of the party, and I think of all of us, and well, not all of us, but a lot of people individually as well.
And they're good people.
Mhm.
I This is one thing I would much I definitely would much rather try to teach people who are a little bit timid and a little bit afraid
Mhm.
to be more confident.
Yeah,
It's easier to turn the low self-esteem libertarians into high self-esteem libertarians than to take a high self-esteem person from somewhere else. But uh, Angela would always use that term, low self-esteem libertarians, which I think is pretty good. But
it is good, and sometimes that's very difficult. I know that. So yeah, yeah. We've got a lot of things to be proud of, but we need to understand our tradition, and we also need to work on forwarding this really brilliant intellectual tradition that we all need to be stewards of, and we all need to be working um, on creating the next generation of that tradition, um, in whatever ways we can.
yeah, it's going to be. I don't know. We might see an opportunity here. I mean, I don't know where we go though, and I'm really worried about what's happening in New York, and I think Trump is actually possibly causing people to go back to the right. I don't or go back to the left, and
Oh,
I
for sure.
and
Uh,
I think he's lost. I think he's lost the youth, and I don't know where they're going to go. I think they.
Unfortunately, it's really dark. So I said this the other night on the show where I don't think there's any going back with either major party that we have. I don't I we have a series of mandates and ordinances and constitutional backbends that Trump and the conservatives are looking at and trying to deploy. It's not as though the progressives aren't going to try to do the same thing. They get back in power and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. We can't go back with the two major parties, and we also can't go forward with them. The good news, if you want to call it good news, is that a plurality of Americans are very dissatisfied with and no longer identify with either major political party. The biggest difficulty that I've seen in the work that I've done is a combination of learned helplessness and shared delusion, which basically means people think that there's nothing that they can do and they're alone in the way that they feel. Um, my challenge that I've been working on for a while has been trying to bring people together who have a common cause, show them that they're not alone, and show them that, incredible things can happen. Um, it's very difficult. It's one of those things that requires having all hands on deck. There are the raw materials there, right? We just need kind of dig into it and then work with it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of uh, showing people what can happen. There is a lot of learned helplessness. I think, I think that's why I've done so many shows about melees. This is something that gives me hope. It doesn't
Mhm.
seem like a lost cause.
Yeah.
Find evidence and grab onto the evidence that shows you it can work. I don't know where uh, we have, that's I don't know. Have you seen some of the things recently? The thing about philosophy too is I think libertarianism has to have a pro reason base. I don't see how it can survive with any other, although I see so many bad arguments and just logical fallacies coming from these people.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and it's always this 90% of the arguments in the libertarian party would go away if they would actually argue with what the people said.
Yes. Yeah.
I
I
mean, I
noticed.
have
Yeah.
all these people that want to argue with me over something I didn't say, and I don't
Mhm.
know where that comes from, and it just creates frustration for me because I didn't say those things.
Right. Right. I see this a lot with the non-aggression principle, right? So a really easy bad faith attack is to say that I am for aggression or I don't like non-aggression because I've written against the non-aggression principle. Fortunately, not that many people have done it, but those that have really love doing it. And it's funny, but it's one of those things that you just you people bad faith attacks don't help anyone. They don't help the person who's arguing. Um, they don't help the people that they're trying to convince because they make everyone a more superficial thinker. Um, there are a lot of criticisms that we can levy against just about anyone. We have to have enough faith in ourselves to be able to make those arguments compellingly, uh, and go from there. Yeah, it's arguing with the substance and arguing on the actual merits rather than the argument that we wish someone had made because it's easier to deconstruct. It's a big issue.
There's no interest in trying to actually, you and I just on here. I tried to look at what Austin said, and I actually tried to answer what he said.
Right.
This is not how. I mean, last night, I mean, I hear Dave Smith, a couple days ago, because I don't know if you've seen what's been going on with him and Liquid
Yeah.
Zulu,
Yeah.
and he comes out and says, "Well, I don't think Liquid Zulu is married." Uh, what makes a fucking difference?
Yeah. David.
So a Scotsman, but what makes a fucking difference?
Yeah.
You
It,
know, and yet
he was.
this somehow makes him right or wrong, and it's
It's
can you engage the argument? Can you engage the criticism? And I've seen this happen in the liberty movement forever.
Yeah. No, I mean, and unfortunately, not just the liberty movement, but you would hope that we would be better, right? Um, and yeah, when people don't have arguments to make, they kind of take pot shots. I've seen this from Dave a lot, where he'll do a lot of ad hominem and then turn around accusing someone else of doing an ad hominem or a straw man. And at this point, it's kind of boring, so I don't really listen to it anymore, um, because it's not worth my time. Uh, but yeah, it's engaging on the merits is just more fun anyhow. I think I it's fine. It's not really meaningful to just make some weird random ad hominem attack because then I'm only criticizing the person, right? I'm only criticizing one person. I'm not criticizing the idea. And maybe I'm arrogant, but I would rather criticize an actual idea than one particular person because I feel like that's more enriching and that's more fruitful and productive.
Yeah, there's just a level of I don't know, but it seems like when I'm with atheist groups, my arguments there are better. I mean, I
Yeah.
sometimes that's just a matter of, well, I'm gonna have debates with these people wherever I go, but where are the better debates?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people will try to come at things. So take the being married example. Okay, well there are a lot of people who feel the way that that Liquid Zulu does who are married. So you've criticized one person, and you've said that, or Dave Smith has said that okay, one person can't make some kind of argument, can't make this argument because they're not married. Whatever the logic was there. What about the people who are married who feel that way? It's a really weird way of doing debate because it doesn't engage the idea at all.
Yeah, it is a weird way. I don't know. some people just, want to look for arguments, or it sometimes seems that way. I don't know if the internet's made this worse or better.
Probably both. um, I think the internet, in one way, has been very empowering because it allows everyone to have a voice in theory, and I think in another way, it allows people to think that they're doing things when they're not actually doing anything, and just kind of screaming into the void. Uh, I think the internet is an amazing tool. It could be a fantastic resource for advancing discourse and debate. And it's also really easy to use it for the converse. I guess that's true of any technology, but we certainly see that with the internet.
Oh yeah, and, I mean, it's quite interesting. I remember, I was criticizing somebody in a group. Well, did you see what this idiot said? And then I said, yeah, here's what the idiot says. Well, and somebody comes back to me. Well, I get, you shouldn't say that. I said, well, I didn't say it. I don't know. I don't know if the net's made things. I think the net probably has made things worse, but I don't know how we get out of this, or social media, because
Can certainly make it better. I think one thing that we need to all do is lengthen our attention spans. I was actually talking with a friend about this. I was like, we could use AI to actually make us not need or not want to use AI as much. We could use AI probably to help us lengthen our attention spans, and then actually want to engage in reading deeper stuff and writing more thoughtful material. So the resources are there. It's just a matter of fighting people who have a very vested interest and not having us do things more deeply.
yeah, it seems that way. I mean, I don't know how you get things. Where do you what do you think we'll see in 2026? I mean, we're
In what
about
sense?
about 6 months away right now.
You talking about the convention?
Yeah.
Well, of course, that LP Alliance, we're calling it the Grand Rapids Revolution. At this point, we are pretty involved in trying to get the right people to convention. I mean, a lot of our fundraising is about that. So a lot of our fundraising is we want to get at least 100 people to convention as delegates. The Proletarians get you room and board and travel. Um, but I think there's a lot of promise. One of the biggest things for the folks that I'm going to call allies, that's not just people who are in LP Alliance Discord server, but people who are broadly aligned with the kind of mission that we have. Um, we're going to need to do something that's very difficult for libertarians. We are going to need to get behind a coherent slate, because that's one of the huge risks that I see is there are people in this party that are very good at voting in lockstep, and there are people who are more independent thinkers. And we've been trying to get the independent thinkers together, um, and get them to come together around a particular slate for a common cause. I've been very heartened by what I've seen thus far, but I don't want to. I don't want to call anything too early. Um, I
Yeah,
want
yeah, I
really
understand.
powerful things. Yeah, yeah. I want really powerful things to come from Grand Rapids, and we're working on that. But we need everyone's help. So
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, it's I do wonder if we can at least, the one problem with philosophy too is I think in a lot of cases it's just very boring for some people.
it can be. That's why you
And
like write it with care. You can't just try and sound smart. It can't just be you trying to impress yourself. You
yeah, but
really
you
have to
gotta
have
know,
an idea.
what do you think? Why do you think it? And
Yeah, yeah.
I really do wish the liberty movement would get more back to its objectivist roots, or its Ayn Rand roots, but I also realize that movement has went so far off the rails for so many different ways, Amanda.
Right.
I don't think libertarians know all the aspect.
Likely not. Likely not. There's a huge objective streak, and I think again there are common denominators there that a lot of us can get behind, and from there, I think you can get to a revival of the objectivist, you know, the objectivist aspect of the liberty movement, which has done great things. Um, I just want to, I want to see everyone get more involved and get more excited about what we can do.
ARI is the one place that's not where I've not really been stabbed in the back by anybody in the
Gotcha,
objectivist movement, but
gotcha. Yeah,
uh, there are some problems. I've been also looking, and asking myself, does it seem like the group, the faction of libertarians that seem to get along as are the Christian libertarians.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering why that is.
I don't know. Um, we certainly have Christian libertarians in LP Alliance, although certainly not all. Um, I don't know if it's just, feeling that common faith foundation. I think anytime you have a faith group, um, they work together pretty well. Um, this is going to come off wrong. I think that's maybe what I don't think ideology needs to replace theological faith, but ideology can be a type of faith group. Not to the extent that we have to, see the government as a god. We shouldn't. Liberty is something that is sacred, though, and I use that devoid of necessarily a god or theology. Infusing the faith that we have in our ideology with something transcendental is important, and I think can also help us work together. It's kind of treating libertarianism as a non-theological faith group, not like a cult, but sort of like something that we're all working toward together, something that we're all part of. We can learn a lot, I think, from the concord that we see with faith groups in the liberty movement.
Well, they seem to be having kids. And,
Hmm.
I look at what I see objectivism. I mean, those people have, though those people might average 0.5 kids or even
Hmm.
0.25 kids.
Right.
It's hardly anything at all. I mean, there's so many people never get married, never have kids. And there's also, cases where too, and now I know uh, at least young men who have been, I can think now of 3 examples of young men who were raised
Hmm.
by objectivists who,
Hmm.
once they got to adulthood, took themselves out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, you're trying to give your kids something positive here and you want to, but so why are your kids making this horrible decision?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've met the kids of people who work in these organizations, and then the kids don't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, it's I don't know what I think the
Yeah.
best thing you have in Ayn Rand right now is all the copyrights expire and then anybody can espouse her philosophy without any repercussions. Because
Right. Right.
uh, David Kelly, to his credit, has always seen some of the problems, and I think he's tried to fix it, although it's hard to fix it because you have to look also what kind of people get attracted to certain things.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
that's true. Um,
it's and these people have insights that are so right. Have insights that can be very correct too. Though it's a very
um,
complicated thing.
it is, and I think with there's been a criticism that's made of the Libertarian Party that for too long it was a social club, and I understand that criticism wholeheartedly. When it's just a bunch of people getting together and having beers and not actually creating social change, it's a problem. But there is a social club aspect that I think is really important. A faith group is much more than a social club, but everyone who's part of that faith group has their tenets of faith as a really, really core element of their life, and has have a bunch of things in common in terms of their daily life, what they do, how they engage in recreational activities, that sort of thing. Bringing those elements to the liberty movement and to the Libertarian Party, I think, is a good thing. Not homogenizing ourselves, but saying, okay, what can we do to create that sense of fellowship, to create that sense of solidarity, um, that allows us to feel organically a common identity without forcing that. Faith groups do that really well. Seeing the liberty movement as a type of faith group could be very lucrative, very valuable. Again, the faith is not necessarily in a deity. The faith is just in our capacity as self owners to do great things, and to fight for really profound change.
Well, and sometimes instead of you want to make 2 dogs be friends, walk them together.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do want maybe the fact that Christianity involves a weekly ritual of everybody going out and saying prayers together, singing
Hmm.
songs together, and doing those things together. I mean, I don't know if we all, if you sang a song before the convention, I actually said, one thing I suggested to Angela
Mm.
at National Life, I said to her, I don't know if you want to organize this, Angela, but let's have a pillow fight.
That'd be fun, honestly.
And
Honestly,
I said to her, this would get out so much of this stuff, and it's harmless, and it would, and
that'd be fun.
it's silly and fun without being necessarily clownish, and nobody's going to get hurt. But to her credit, I think Angela understood that.
I think a food fight would also be really fun too.
Some fun.
Everyone's always wanted to have a food fight. I think we could have a Libertarian Party food fight at National.
I don't like the idea of wasting food. It's too messy. Pillow fight would be better, or just pillow fights, or going outside and having a squirt gun fight or something like that. But yeah, it's other than that, yeah, just doing something that lets these things out. It's and sad but true. I still remember. I'm at the Ohio convention that one year. From the back of the room, Rhonda Burr holds her hand up. I move to adjourn the meeting, and meeting's adjourned. And gets up. She's beeline right to the bar. Why didn't you just walk out and leave?
Yeah. Make a point, I guess. Make a statement.
Yeah, there are too many of. I'd say say 20 to 25% of people go to the LP conventions just to get drunk.
Yeah.
And there are other reasons to go too, but yeah,
there are plenty.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else to discuss at this point, and
I think it's been a great conversation. And again, I always enjoy being on, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I hope everything works out in Wisconsin. It's got to be cool up there. It's
Thanks very much. Yeah. You too.
Yeah. Where can we find you out there? Just on Twitter?
So yes, you can find me on Twitter at Ajax the Griff. You can also join the LP Alliance Discord. Follow us on X at LP_allies. We also have a YouTube channel. We're streaming most nights a week at this point, doing something. So you can follow me there. And always love getting new people in Discord, getting new people involved.
Yes, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack, and people are giving me money at Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you, Amanda Griffiths. I'm Chris Baker.
Thank you very much, Chris.
We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.